A young black man saves his best friend's mother from drowning. This story will leave you in awe. What happens midway through changes the entire ending. We'd love to know where you're watching this video from, so leave a comment. While you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. It was a hot summer day, and the city of São Vicente was buzzing with its usual activities. Amid the nature surrounding the city, a group of friends often gathered near the Paratinga River, where the calm waters reflected the surrounding mountains. Among these friends were Tiago and João, inseparable since childhood. Tiago, an 18-year-old black young man, was known for his calm demeanor, steady posture, and sharp gaze. João, of the same age, came from a wealthy and respected family in the city. Despite their social differences, their friendship transcended any barriers. It was late afternoon, and the two friends were sitting by the riverbank, watching the serene flow of water. As they laughed and chatted, Helena, João's mother, approached. She had always been an important figure in João's life, but also had a close relationship with Tiago, treating him like family. Helena, a strong and elegant woman whose face always reflected wisdom, mentioned that she was going to take a swim to enjoy the heat of the day. João, distracted by his phone, didn't even lift his eyes, but Tiago, always alert, watched as she entered the crystal-clear waters. As Helena moved further from the shore, something strange began to happen. The seemingly calm river started to gain strength. An unexpected current pulled Helena, and in the blink of an eye, what was meant to be a relaxing swim turned into a scene of desperation. Tiago noticed her frantic movements as she struggled to stay afloat. "João, your mother!" Tiago shouted, already sprinting toward the water. Without hesitation, he dove into the river, swimming with all his might against the current. João stood frozen, watching in disbelief as his friend sped toward his mother. Time seemed to slow as Tiago, driven by a mix of courage and desperation, reached Helena. The cold water bit into his skin, but adrenaline kept him focused. Helena was already weak, almost submerged, when Tiago managed to grab her firmly and began swimming back, fighting the current that tried to drag them further away. After what felt like an eternity, Tiago managed to pull Helena to the shore, where João finally snapped out of his shock and rushed to help them. Helena coughed up water, her eyes wide with fear, but she was alive. Tiago collapsed onto the grass, panting, while João hugged his mother, still in shock. The silence that followed was thick, filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. I don't know how to thank you, Tiago," Helena said, her voice still trembling. Tiago simply shook his head, trying to catch his breath. "No need to thank me. I'd do it for any of you," he replied with a shy smile. That moment, though terrifying, seemed to solidify the bond between the two families. But what no one knew was that the incident would mark the beginning of a series of events that would test not only João and Tiago's friendship, but also reveal deep secrets that would change everyone's lives forever. The days following the river incident were seemingly calm. Helena recovered well, and João's family was visibly grateful to Tiago. They invited him over for meals, and even João's reserved father, Dr. Augusto, showed his appreciation through discreet gifts, something uncommon for a man so restrained. Tiago, however, didn't feel comfortable with the attention. He had never cared about the family's wealth or status. His friendship was genuine, and in his mind, what he had done at the river was simply a reflection of that. However, a growing unease began to stir within him. No matter how hard he tried, the river incident haunted his dreams. He repeatedly dreamed of Helena being pulled under the water by something he couldn't see. There was something about that current that didn't seem natural, something invisible and threatening. One night, during one of these restless episodes, Tiago decided to walk to the river. The sky was overcast, and the moon barely lit the path. When he reached the riverbank, he observed the dark waters intently. The river was calm, but Tiago couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He sat by the water, unconsciously drifting into memories of his childhood. Tiago had never known his father, and his mother, Dona Marissa, always avoided talking about the past. All he knew was that his father had disappeared when he was very young, and since then, His mother had raised Tiago alone. As his thoughts wandered, he heard a noise coming from the water. His eyes widened, but he saw nothing at first. Then, a sudden chill ran down his spine, and he swore he saw a shadow in the water. He stood up abruptly, his heart racing. "I must be imagining things," he muttered to himself. The next day, the city seemed busier than usual. As Tiago walked to work, he ran into João, who seemed distracted. "You look tense," Tiago commented, trying to make conversation. João sighed and looked at his friend with a serious expression. "There's something I need to tell you." "But not here." Tiago was intrigued but agreed. They headed to a more secluded cafe, away from the city's bustle. When they sat down, João looked at Tiago with an expression Tiago had never seen before. Fear. "Tiago, there's something I never told you. Something about my mother. Actually, about our family." Tiago leaned in, intrigued. "What's going on, João? What haven't you told me?" João took a deep breath, as if preparing for a difficult confession. "My mother. She almost drowned in that river for a reason. It wasn't just the current. Our family is involved in something much deeper and darker." Tiago frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean by that?" João hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice low and full of tension. "My mother, she has a secret. A secret that involves your father, Tiago." João's revelation left Tiago in shock. His father? How could his family be involved with a man he had never known? Tiago's mind raced with possibilities. He tried to form words, but João interrupted him, realizing how hard it would be for Tiago to process everything. "Let me explain from the beginning," João said, calmer but visibly disturbed. "My mother always acted strangely when she talked about the past. I never thought much of it, just assumed it was her way. But recently, after what happened at the river, she became restless. One day, I overheard her talking to my father, and that's when I found out about your father's involvement." Tiago felt his chest tighten. A mix of anger and curiosity bubbled up inside him. "Involvement? What are you talking about?" João sighed deeply before continuing. "Your father, Tiago, he didn't just disappear for no reason. There was an accident, something that was never fully explained. My mother always knew more than she let on. She was involved in that mystery." Tiago felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The father he had never known, whose whereabouts had always been a mystery, now seemed to be connected to João's family in ways he could never have imagined. "What does my mother have to do with this? She never mentioned anything." João looked at his friend with sorrow in his eyes. "She probably tried to protect you, Tiago. The truth is, your father and my mother had a relationship before you were born. It was a well-kept secret. When he disappeared, my mother was devastated, but no one besides my father knew the full story." Tiago abruptly stood up from the table, his mind swirling with unanswered questions. "Are you saying my father had a secret life? That your mother was involved in it? And why did no one ever tell me?" João shook his head. "I don't know all the details, but what I do know is that something very strange happened back then. And somehow, the river is connected to it." In the days that followed, Tiago tried confronting his mother, but she dodged his questions, leaving him even more frustrated. He didn't know whom to trust, feeling like his entire world was crumbling around him. His nights were filled with disturbing dreams, where the river seemed like a living entity, calling him, drawing him into its depths. One of those nights, Tiago decided to return to the Paratinga River. He needed to understand what was happening and find answers. As he reached the riverbank, he saw an unexpected figure. Helena, João's mother. She was alone, staring intently at the water. "You knew I would come," Tiago said, approaching her. Helena turned slowly, her face pale, and her eyes carrying the weight of years of untold secrets. "I always knew this moment would come, Tiago," she said in a grave tone. Tiago remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "Your father and I, we were very close. But what brought us together was something you could never imagine. An ancient curse tied to this river." Helena hesitated, as if the words were difficult to say. "Curse?" Tiago asked, feeling a wave of skepticism. Helena nodded, looking at the river. This river isn't ordinary, Tiago. It holds a power that few understand. Your father. He tried to defy that power, and that's what led to his disappearance. Tiago was confused, but he felt that there was truth in Helena's words. What does this have to do with me? With you almost drowning? Helena turned to Tiago, her eyes shining with an intensity he had never seen before. Everything. Your father made a pact with the river, a pact to protect you and your mother. But that pact came with a price. Now that you saved my life, Tiago, the river wants you back. Tiago was paralyzed by the revelation. The river wanted him? What did that mean? Helena slowly approached, her words becoming more urgent. You saved my life, Tiago, but that was just the beginning. The river has already chosen you as the next to bear the burden your father tried to avoid. The current that day was a warning, and now, there's no more escape. Tiago felt the weight of Helena's words, as if fate were finally revealing itself in an unavoidable way. He tried to process everything. His father's story, the pact, the curse. Nothing made sense, yet everything seemed to fit together. How can I stop this? I don't want to be involved in something I don't even understand, Tiago said, feeling a mix of anger and desperation. Helena shook her head sadly. It's not about what you want, Tiago. The river has its own rules. But there's a way to break the cycle. If you're willing to make a sacrifice. Tiago looked at Helena, his eyes fixed on hers. He knew that, at that moment, his life would change forever. The full moon illuminated the darkness of the night, casting a pale glow over the Paratinga River, whose waters flowed with a strange tranquility. Tiago and João were silent as they walked toward the river, both aware that this night would be decisive. They weren't sure what they would find, but what they knew was that a sacrifice had to be made. It was a moment of tension, where the unknown loomed over them like an invisible shadow. As they walked toward the river, Tiago felt the weight of the decisions accumulating on his shoulders. Each step was a mix of uncertainty and resolve. He knew he was about to face something beyond his understanding. The story of his family was intricately tied to that water, to the pact his father had made, and now he stood on the front lines to correct the mistake that had haunted his life for so long. But what would be asked of him? Would it be the sacrifice of his own life, or something even deeper? The silence between the two friends was dense, almost palpable. Although they knew they were together on that journey, Tiago understood that, on some level, he was alone in that challenge. The river wanted something from him, and that was undeniable. The hidden power coursing through those waters was calling him, demanding something he didn't yet fully comprehend. I still don't understand what this sacrifice really means, Tiago, João said, breaking the silence as they approached the riverbank. Tiago stopped, watching the slow movement of the water in front of him. The dark waters reflected the full moon, but at the same time, they seemed impenetrable, as if they hid something deeper and darker. He took a deep breath before responding. I don't fully understand either, João, but I feel that what my father did, the pact he made, needs to be undone somehow. I just don't know what the river will ask in return. João's unease was evident, but he knew Tiago's determination would push him forward. And in some way, João understood that even though it was risky, he needed to be by Tiago's side, supporting him every step of the way, even if it meant facing something incomprehensible. They continued in silence until they reached the riverbank. The sound of the water flowing gently contrasted with the tension they felt in the air. The trees around them seemed to bend toward the river, as if they were watching closely what was about to happen. A faint mist began to form over the surface of the river, gradually spreading, enveloping the environment in a mysterious and heavy atmosphere. Tiago knelt near the water, reaching out to touch it. The sensation was that of cold water, almost cutting. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to feel his father's presence, trying to understand what he should do next. The sacrifice the river demanded was still an enigma, but Tiago knew time was running out. He could feel the growing pressure in his chest, as if the very air around him was being compressed. Suddenly, the surface of the water began to glow slightly. A bluish light emerged from the depths, softly illuminating the riverbank and Tiago's figure, still kneeling. The light was soft, but there was a palpable energy coming from it. It was as if the river were responding to Tiago's presence, recognizing that he was there to pay the debt left by his father. João took a step back, surprised by the appearance of the light. "What is that?" he murmured, almost breathless. Tiago didn't respond immediately. He was absorbing everything that was happening around him. He knew it was a sign. The river was ready to hear his decision, to accept the sacrifice. But what should be sacrificed? The answer, he slowly realized, wasn't life or death. It was something deeper. Tiago closed his eyes again and took a deep breath. "I understand now," he murmured, as if speaking to the river itself. "The sacrifice the river wants isn't a life. It's not my body. It's forgiveness." João looked at Tiago, confused. "Forgiveness? What do you mean?" Tiago opened his eyes and looked at his friend, his expression calm but firm. "My father made a pact with the river, but he carried a guilt he could never shake off. He left me that debt, and I've been carrying the weight of it my whole life without even understanding. The sacrifice the river wants is the sacrifice of the past. I need to forgive what my father did, and I need to forgive myself for everything I've let consume me since then." It was a profound revelation. Tiago finally understood that the cycle of pain and sacrifice that enveloped his family wasn't tied to death or physical tragedy, but rather to the inability to forgive and let go of the past. His father had made the pact with the best intentions, but he had never been able to free himself from the guilt that came with it, and that guilt had passed on to Tiago, weighing on him like an invisible shadow. Tiago stood up and took a step toward the river. The bluish light grew in intensity, as if the river were responding to his resolution. He looked at the water, feeling the invisible force around him, and spoke the words with a clarity he had never felt before. "I forgive you, Father. I forgive what you did and understand the sacrifice you tried to make for me and our family. And I also forgive myself for carrying this pain for so long." The cycle ends here. As soon as Tiago spoke those words, the light around him shone brightly for a moment before gradually dissipating, disappearing into the depths of the river. The water, which had once glowed with an incomprehensible energy, began to calm down. The currents that seemed to pull toward the depths vanished, and the river's surface returned to its natural tranquility. João, who had watched everything in silence, felt a wave of relief wash over him. The atmosphere around them seemed lighter, and the weight of tension that had surrounded the two friends for so long finally dissolved. The sacrifice the river demanded wasn't of blood or life, but of redemption and forgiveness. Tiago took a step back, feeling lighter than ever. He looked at João with a soft smile on his lips. "It's over. The cycle is broken." The two friends stood in silence for a moment, taking in what had just happened. The river, which once seemed like an unyielding and vengeful force, was now at peace, as if the very spirit of the water had been appeased by the sacrifice of forgiveness. The past, which had haunted Tiago and his family for so long, was finally released. Tiago and João, exhausted but victorious, began walking back home, knowing that a new chapter of their lives was beginning. The sacrifice had been made, and the river was at peace. The night was darker than usual, and the shadows of the trees surrounding the Paratinga River seemed to stretch in strange directions, as if being pulled by an invisible force. The atmosphere was heavy, almost tangible, and the air was thick with tension that made each step Tiago and João took echo on the riverbank. The decision was near, and they knew the crucial moment was approaching. The two friends, united by a deep friendship and now by an intertwined fate, were about to face the greatest challenge of their lives. The river, which had once been the backdrop to many peaceful afternoons, now revealed itself as a portal to something much older and darker. The waters were darker, almost like oil, reflecting the faint glow of the moon that struggled to pierce the thick layer of clouds. A thin mist began to form over the water's surface, swirling like a spectral veil. Tiago felt as though the river, in some way, was aware of their presence, watching, waiting for them to make a decision. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The pact his father had made was about to be fully collected. Tiago understood that the river wasn't just a natural element. It was the physical manifestation of something deeper, an ancient force that demanded balance. His father, in trying to protect the family, had disrupted that balance, and now, Tiago was at the center of a debt that needed to be paid. João, standing beside Tiago, remained silent, but his eyes showed a mix of determination and fear. He knew that although the curse rested on Tiago, they were both involved in this situation. João's loyalty to his friend was unquestionable, and he wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice himself if necessary. However, he still didn't know exactly how they could break the cycle and end the curse that haunted the river and their families. "Are you sure you want to do this, Tiago?" João's voice, breaking the silence, sounded somber, almost like an echo in the dense air of the night. "We don't know exactly what will happen." Tiago looked at his friend with a determined gaze, though with a touch of uncertainty. "I don't have a choice, João. This all started long before I was born. My father tried to protect me, but now it's up to me to finish what he started. I can't run from this." The moment demanded courage, but also sacrifice. Tiago knew that the river expected more than just their presence there. It demanded an offering, something that would break the cycle his father had begun. There was a price to be paid, but what would it be? Tiago didn't have all the answers, but he felt deep within him that the sacrifice wouldn't be his own life. It would be something much more profound, something that touched the roots of his identity. He turned to João and looked at him for a long moment. Their friendship, which had begun in childhood, had gone through many challenges and now placed them face to face with a fate neither of them could have predicted. Tiago knew he wouldn't have made it this far without João's support. His friend was there, by his side, ready to face whatever lay ahead. However, Tiago also knew that this journey was ultimately his. He would have to make the choice. The river's waters began to stir slightly, as if responding to Tiago's thoughts. The current gradually increased, swirling around them, creating small and constant whirlpools. The river was impatient, waiting for the final decision. "João, I know you want to help me, and you've already helped me more than you know. But now, this is a burden I need to carry alone." Tiago spoke, his voice filled with emotion. "My father did this for me, and now I have to do this for him. At least this time, I can choose how things end." João seemed ready to protest, but something in Tiago's tone made him stop. He knew his friend was right. There was something about the curse, something deeply personal that Tiago needed to resolve on his own. Tiago approached the riverbank. The dark waters, now swirling with greater force, seemed to call him, as if whispering promises and ancient secrets. He knelt near the water and reached out, touching the cold surface. An intense chill ran through his body, but he didn't pull back. He closed his eyes, concentrating, trying to connect with his father's spirit, which he felt was there, waiting. "Father, I'm here. I'm ready," Tiago murmured in a low voice. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence was absolute. João watched from a distance, apprehensive, unsure of what to expect. But then, something began to change. A faint, bluish light emerged from the depths of the river, slowly growing in intensity. It wasn't bright or blinding, but it radiated a calm and powerful presence. The light enveloped Tiago, covering his body like a mantle of energy. He felt a deep peace wash over him, as if he were finally connected to something he had been searching for his entire life. His past, his heritage, and, most of all, his father. Suddenly, Tiago heard a soft voice coming from all around, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. It was his father's voice. "Tiago, my son, you made the right choice. The river doesn't demand your life, but your forgiveness. Forgive the past. Forgive me. It's the only way to break the cycle." His father's words echoed inside Tiago, filling him with an understanding he hadn't had before. The sacrifice wasn't death or suffering, but forgiveness. The river wasn't bound by a curse of vengeance. It merely reflected the imbalance caused by guilt and broken promises. Tiago now understood that his father had tried to protect his family, but the weight of guilt and regret had imprisoned him. With tears in his eyes, Tiago whispered, "I forgive you, Father, and I forgive myself for not understanding sooner." As the words left his lips, the light around him shone more brightly for a moment before dissipating. The river returned to its original calmness, and the oppressive energy that had surrounded Tiago and Joao until then dissolved into the air. It was as if the river had finally received what it wanted. Tiago felt an inexplicable peace within himself. He opened his eyes and looked at Joao, who, though shocked by what he had just witnessed, smiled with relief. "It's over, Tiago. You did it." The two friends stood there for a moment, watching the river's waters, which now flowed peacefully. The pact was undone, the river was free, and so were Tiago and his family. They embraced, and in that instant, Tiago knew he wasn't just closing a chapter of his life, but also beginning another, a new beginning. As they emerged from the water, exhausted but victorious, Tiago and Joao knew the cycle had been broken. The river was finally at peace, and so were they. Helena, now free from her guilt, embraced Tiago with tears in her eyes. "You saved all of us," she said. Tiago looked at the river one last time, knowing that although his father was absent, he had left a legacy of courage and sacrifice that Tiago would carry with him forever.